when you look at the business potential for the implementation of intelligent assistants, you get into some discussions about the value, both, and that Geraldine actually hinted at a little bit too, was the value to the enterprise that occurs when there's a good relationship formed through an intelligent assistant. And it's a concept that, actually, let me have each member of the panel introduce themselves and sort of describe their companies and their role and their thoughts. I'll start with David and move you guys as left to right, or right to left.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. David Lloyd is president and CEO of IntelliResponse, and we were acquired last year by 24/7, and that really helped us take our roughly 200 customers and move them over to a platform now that could do end-to-end, not just VA, but do the integration within voice, IVR, chat, and all the other channels that our customers touch, which are outside of VA. So very excited with that. The integration is now complete. We're completely on the inside and well integrated, and it's feeling fantastic right now.
So Attorney Lorentzen, General Manager at Nuance On Demand. So been with Nuance for about 13 years now. So our focus in the enterprise world is really all around customer experience and automation. So working across both our voice channels with IVR, proactive outbound notifications, contacting consumers in a proactive and intelligent way. And then lastly with Nina, our Nuance Interactive Natural Assistant, so on our mobile and website. So really that omni-channel, multi-channel ability to provide self-service to consumers of enterprise services.
Hi, I'm Phil Gray. I'm with Interactions, and I guess a good common theme here. We're all focused on intelligence assistance across channels. I think it's probably something we're going to see quite a bit more of in coming years. Sort of this pervasive opportunity to have an assistant, an enterprise assistant that works across channels and sometimes even maintains context. So Interactions, we're at the forefront of that. We're probably known most for our voice applications. That's where our heritage started. But we rapidly expanded across channels. So,
Nick Gyles, CTO with WDS. WDS was a company acquired by Xerox 3 years ago. And many of you might be wondering, well, what's Xerox got to do with the intelligent assistant space? We find ourselves in a really interesting position in the industry. More than half of our revenue today in Xerox comes from business services, where we're running customer interactions on behalf of brands. We have over 200 contact centers around the globe. And at the same time, we have a long history of research, both within our own research centers, but also through PARC, which you'll hear a bit more about tomorrow. What WDS is about is bringing that research and the innovation around conversational automation, dialogue systems, bringing that into the environments where we're today interacting with customers on behalf of brands around the world.
Very good, thank you. And so you see our building a sort of a lexicon of terms. You were calling it conversational computing, conversational commerce, and that sort of thing. And we're mapping all that to the intelligent assistant, and then overlaying it on enterprise infrastructure for doing what enterprises do, including interacting with their customers. And as I hinted at earlier, there's some skepticism about the ability of the technologies we're tracking to do what we claim to. And one of the most tangible one was I had written that that IntelliResponse specifically was witnessing an upward trend in automation using intelligent assistants, coupled with an increase in satisfaction, customer satisfaction. And I think I wrote it up in LinkedIn, and one of the comments at the bottom was, "How is this possible?" and called me a name or two. And I said, well, no, I think it's actually true. But I'm going to ask David to elaborate a little bit, because I had heard some of this through a presentation you had given.
Yeah, we were fortunate to do a presentation with all our utilities, I guess it was about a month ago. One of the interesting things, I think, in general terms about the whole concept of intelligent assistance is it's not new. And we talk about it as if it's this thing that's come on the scene in the last year or 2 years. But when I look at, personally speaking, we've had clients including large banks, insurers, healthcare, that are all on these platforms and have been for years, as I'm sure many of my colleagues have as well up here. So that part's not new. I think the traceability and the metrics that we're starting to collect, though, that's newer. And I think we're finally figuring out the right way to do it. A great customer success story as it relates to customers having a much better experience was one of our clients, Opus, uses us across all of their platforms and mobile for the customer interactions. What they found was actually an 11% increase in NPS between interactions with a virtual assistant or an intelligent agent and then their chat channel.
Right. And for those not in the customer care, NPS is the Net Promoter Score, which is popularized probably going back 10 years as like a shorthand measure based on customers saying that they would, in fact, recommend a vendor to others based on their experience. And anyway, go ahead.
No, and I think so what they saw was that when, let's face it, the recent study I saw at Google, 93% of people start their whole journey on the web. So they're going digital. So when they can interact with an intelligent agent in a digital environment, that's stage one. You're meeting the customer where they want to be met. But when you're not satisfying the need of the customer and there's that need to escalate, what we found in Optus's case was that by intelligently taking that conversation from the VA to a live chat environment, but with a live chat agent being completely aware of the context and the conversation the VA was having, it meant a continuation of the service for the customer, not this abrupt stop and a brand new conversation where they had to restate themselves. And that's where they saw this great increase in that promoter score. I think the overall CSAT increases that we're seeing are one of, going back to that earlier statistic, that people are starting their conversations in the web environment, in the digital environment, through mobile. Although we're not seeing mobile first in the surveys we've seen quite yet, but it's pretty close. But they're starting it on the web environment. And since we're helping them and engaging them there, that's leading to a much higher level of satisfaction with the customers because they can serve themselves.
And you're all welcome to comment. Tony, you
Yeah,
saying-
no, so we totally agree with that said. And I think one of the things that we've seen also is, as conversations start in the digital channel, what we find with organizations is they're quite surprised sometimes about what consumers are interacting with them for. Like, why are they contacting them? So we're actually leveraging a lot of that data, and I think it's important when you talk about kind of the cross-channel experience, how do we apply that to other channels? And then how do we apply that to the voice channel? How do we apply that potentially to a proactive outbound channel? So we're certainly seeing the same thing, and we certainly feel that adopting that information and how we apply it to make that contextually aware, omni-channel experience is important.
Comment, Phil? Or?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think any time you make something more lower the effort for a consumer, the net promoter is going to go higher. And so I think part of what we all need to do is really focus on that. Create not just helping the customer through a transaction, but helping them lower their effort so they can do things more seamlessly, more easily. I think there's still a long way to go. I think a lot of times you do see disjointed experiences where someone will have a virtual assistant and a chat system that aren't connected, and then you find yourself going into one spot and going to the other. So I think that's a move in the right direction when you do put the two together. But I think over time, as these intelligent assistants get smarter, the need for that chat agent will go down, and even that becomes even more seamless and quicker, because even with a chat agent, you still have a little bit of a queue time. There's still a little bit of a delay. So I think you're starting to see that you can actually have a better experience if the technology works better, because you're not going to have the delay. You're going to have immediate response, and you have an opportunity to even wow the customer further than having both the live agent and the assistant.
I think to that point of complexity, we've already gone through the process through knowledge management and through other initiatives to deflect those FAQs, the basic question answering kind of transactions. And what we see across our centres, 2/3 of the interactions we handle are of a complex nature. So we're either where the customer is wanting to transact, they're wanting to come and make a healthcare claim, or they're wanting to change their tariff on something, or it's an ambiguous presentation of symptoms. They're phoning up saying, email's not working on my iPhone. How do you get from that presentation of a symptom to figuring out, well, what is actually broken in that scenario, and what's the best solution to fix it. And I think that's the progression of the technology that we're very much looking at, is around, particularly around troubleshooting. How do you take these very ambiguous statements about, you know, the customer's context and their environment, and figure out what to do with those? And that's really the progression we're seeing as we look to go from that, you know, automation of those simple question answering into much more complex scenarios. That's the challenge.
And then, you know, Beth's presentation from US Bank was Nina, and I guess what was very interesting to me is it sounded like there was a lot of out-of-the-box capabilities brought in, and I guess that was Nina Mobile that was being used. As you do the transfer, is Nina Web looking at the same sort of stuff, or?
Yes, I mean, the way we look at it from an enterprise perspective, there's really three key things, which, you know, we started pioneering with Nina Mobile. You know, and as we progress with our Nina Web technologies, and as we progress with our conversational IVR technologies, it's all around three things, which is, one is how do we make it easy for not only organizations, but also consumers, so somewhat what Phil said, you know, make the experience easy. But also at an organizational point of view, you know, how do we start leveraging that content, leveraging that information, leveraging that knowledge across channels, so making it easier for the enterprise organization to implement these technologies. The second is around conversational, and we've heard a lot, you know, discussions around conversational, and Nina was actually our first foray into that, and we're now starting to see that bleed over into some of our other channels, like IVR, for example. You know, being able to provide that more conversational interface. And the last is around intelligence, you know, leveraging knowledge, leveraging information, leveraging relationship to be able to, you know, drive those more intelligent types of interactions.
So how did you feel about Geraldine's observation that the CRM system is the place where data, I'm going to get the quote wrong. It was the data morgue. What's that? Mortuary. The mortuary for personal data. Thank you, Doc.
I think one thing we see with CRM data is human agents in a call center aren't incentivized on accurately logging the context or the problem, and therefore it's garbage in, garbage out. So a lot of the data can't really be used. With a virtual agent, you get a much higher fidelity semantic model. You know, you can actually figure out through machine learning what did go on in that interaction. What was the intent of the customer? What did we do about it? Did it work? Was NPS correct? And it's a much richer seam of information that you can then send back through to product development, through to other parts of the enterprise. So rather than just being this, you know, customer care just being this something that we all have to do it, but nobody really wants to be talking to their customers in a call center. You know, it becomes a much more valued source of, you know, that true voice of the customer.
Better than human.
Well, I think the challenge today is it's not that we don't have enough data. We have more than enough data, and we probably look at less than 0.1% of the data that we do collect. Thinking about a recent IBM study I saw a while ago that's looking at the volume creation and what's able to be consumed. So that's part of the challenge. And also, when you have to put a data scientist in front of that data, that's a problem as well. So I think the focus is really on taking these rich conversations that are occurring, whether it's through a VA or a virtual agent or other channels. If you can actually use that data immediately in real time, that's so critical to really understanding true voice of customer at that moment of the conversation. And I think that's critical. And today, that's, I think, the other side of the VA that really needs to be strived for. It's great to have a conversation, but what are we actually learning out of the conversation? And if we're not learning anything, you know, there's only a part of the value that's being realized.
And what's the latency on that? I mean, could you learn stuff in real time and put it into the answer to the next question coming in?
Arguably, yeah, you can use that, especially when you think of the whole issue of journey mapping now and understanding customer journeys and where customers are actually going. So when you have an individual who's asking a question pattern and you can compare that against all the individuals in the last week that were following the same pattern, that allows you to almost look at the whole issue of next issue avoidance and predict, with the answer coming back to that consumer, what's the next thing that they're likely to even ask. So kind of head them off at the pass. And we saw a great example of that in banking where new product came out, the customer didn't know how to use it. And you could see in the question patterns how if, in the case of taking a picture of the check, they would have known that the next logical thing was, how long is a check on hold? Well, that kind of next issue avoidance, that person probably, the first person picked up and called the call center. But as we learn from the pattern of machine learning in that's the next logical question, we can actually present that back to the consumer who asks it for that next opportunity.
Interesting. The traditional, excuse me, the traditional pattern for automating things is to sort of understand what those repetitive things are and then make them programmatic. And Phil, I'm thinking specifically of a theme which I think is going to come up, that came up a little earlier in the balancing the human touch and automation is, initially, at least with interactions architecture, there's a defined role for the live individuals to play in terms of almost being the institutional knowledge and at least disambiguating to begin with. But then, are they logging the sorts of things that David was bringing up, where hey, this is the most accurate answer to this question right now, but we know what the next question is going to be, and we can anticipate that.
Yeah, well, I think essentially what we've done with what's a technology we call adaptive understanding is that if you look at most technologies, when technology fails, which it often does, it can't answer, it can't recognize, can't do something, then you're sort of putting that burden on the customer, and the customer then has to either say something again or figure out what they did wrong, change their behavior to adapt to that system. So what we've done is we've added human intelligence to assist the technology when the technology fails. So what then happens is seamlessly, if you're talking and conversing with the system and the system can't understand, we seamlessly move that to a live agent. That live agent is able to interpret that, and then actually we use that for real-time machine learning feedback to create models that actually automate and further down the road. But the big advantage of it is the customer isn't sacrificing experience while the machine is learning. And I think that's the big leap forward, where most systems, the customer has to really, they're the one who suffers through the experience when the machine is getting to a point where it's adequate. And so it does two things. It does that, and then secondly, it just delivers an experience that goes beyond the boundary of the technology at a given time, allowing the technology to catch up. So you're delivering these very lifelike virtual assistant experiences that may use a small amount of human assistance, but at the same time, you're training the technology to take that on and at a later time. So.
I think there's a subtlety there as well in terms of the role of the agent in that architecture, in that we move from a world where we have call center agents who are just transacting, they're incentivized on getting through the call as quickly as possible, moving on to the next one, to a mode where they're much more about knowledge contribution. So they're actually, they're training the system, they're correcting it, they're putting it back on the tracks when the wheels come off the rails. And over time, what we see, we think a lot about this problem, employing 50,000 or so call center agents. What's the role of the call center agent or the contact center agent in 5 to 10 years' time? And we definitely see these environments moving from these kind of transactional factories into a knowledge contribution center. Hopefully, raising the quality of the role. We have in any customer care, attrition is always a problem. It's not a great career path, as it were, but we can actually start to move into more of this sort of customer experience management, and that's I think how we see the role. Yes, automation ultimately will result in fewer transactions, fewer similar transactions coming back through into call centers, but the role of the contact center is still there as the sort of the safety net, the place of last resort for handling customers, but also being the contribution engine that then drives the technology.
Yeah, I mean, the agent pools and contact centers are just, a tremendous source to, what we want to do with our, virtual agents is mimic, right, what a call center agent can do over time. So just having that intelligence and leveraging that intelligence in the real-time format to continuously improve systems is, one of the areas that we're certainly focused on, and I agree with your statement there.
So it's almost like an agent crowdsourcing model to really get the right content and answers into, or the understanding, so that when the consumer actually has that question. Is that how you see that as well?
Yeah, I think it's that kind of private crowd. I think some of the challenges, though, is how do you make sure that you are implementing best practice and not tribal knowledge? And quite often where you've got a tenured agent that's maybe taking calls for a year, they're going to shortcut straight to an answer that might not be the best answer. You also need to take into account things like the cost of the solution. So, for example, if I phone up with a problem with my cell phone, the one thing that's pretty much guaranteed to solve the problem, assuming it's not hardware, is a hard reset. Now, so
right.
if you're not careful, what happens is agents will, the first thing they'll do, I can't download my contacts. Right, let's just hard reset your phone. The cost of doing that to the customer, in the sense that they might lose their data, they've got to reinstall all their apps. It's a horrible process, but it has hit all the metrics. It's got rid of the call quickly. It's solved the problem. So there's these sort of hidden issues that come out. But what we want to be able to do is capture that knowledge, but then filter it in a way where we actually know this is the best process based on this sort of symptoms. This is the kind of certified action that we want to take with that customer.
Yeah, because the hard reset, to your point, if the metric is, mean time to resolution in resolution, that goes down as a double success, and yet it didn't help anybody. But it raises a couple of issues. One is, we're talking very casually about what amounts to a new computer memory element in the enterprise architecture, that there's some repository of right answers and right processes. And I know there's some precursors to this, but do we, as like the vendors of intelligent assistance solutions, start recommending this better knowledge management, some bag where good stuff is stored? And where is it? Is it in your cloud, Tony?
Well, one of the things we've done is we've appointed in projects content managers, right? So looking at best practices, looking at how particular, whether a live chat agent or call center agent handles tasks, but really content managers who keep track of those best practices. So that's how we kind of help determine, what business processes, what intelligence we want to use from that, so we can apply it into future systems and future learnings.
And where's it go?
Well, the problem is there's too
Customer
many
experience.
SharePoint, there's too many SharePoint implementations out there that are the cesspool of tribal knowledge and other knowledge within an organization. So I think we actually see when we've applied it in a lot of our banking environments, we actually see the whole use of the intelligent agent as an overlay to actually the knowledge management piece, because what we found is most of our clients aren't getting much in terms of metrics out of their knowledge management. If you've seen the SharePoint implementation or many others, you can understand why.
Kind of decentralized.
But the challenge is, most of us cling to the 7,000 or 8,000 documents that are critical to running our business, and the answer is, if statistically, most of them are irrelevant, but you're spending a lot of time, money, and energy on them. So we look at the VA as a way of really stripping away, especially with the analytics, what's really important to the organization that you should focus on and continue to cultivate, and what you should just let go and let it be in the long tail and don't worry about it.
One of the interesting things we're seeing too is actually leveraging the VA for contact center agents, whether it's a live agent or whatever the case may be. So it's one, consumer facing, but two, internally facing.
I agree.
From that point of view.
I think the moving from a world of answer driven to your point, knowledge bases with we've got some knowledge bases of 40, 50,000 articles, and when you actually look at how many of those are being hit, it's top 20, 10% if you're lucky. That any call center, you see the same thing, which is the top 5 or 10 call drivers probably account for 70, 80% of the call volume. But you're spending all this time and money maintaining all of this knowledge, which actually makes the useful knowledge difficult to discover and difficult to surface because it's hidden in the noise of the rest of the knowledge base. So the virtual agent allows you to take a much more question-centric view to say, actually, what knowledge do we need to answer the whatever percentage of questions that we're looking to automate through the virtual agent. And I think that drives some efficiency, but you're never going to replace the SharePoints and the wikis and the spreadsheets on people's desktop. It's about how do you expose them and make them the gold standard for the knowledge that then surfaces up to customers.
So has that become part of the engagement model, is having some almost a plain English lens to define what questions to ask them to ask the questions in plain English that discover what the kernel of good information is among the chat, a wheat from the chat?
Yeah, I could start. I think building that dialogue, again, I think we all are realizing that these customer transactions are becoming more complex, right? Because people are doing the easier things directly, natively in the digital channels. So now as the conversation becomes more complex, it isn't just an FAQ. You have to have a dialogue with that customer to figure out how to help them. And if you think about what a good agent does, it's exactly what they do. They'll get some information from the customer, and then they'll execute some steps, maybe look up something in a system and come up with a solution to that problem. And I think for us as the virtual assistant and intelligent assistant industry, we have to model that, right? We have to somehow get that intelligence built into our intelligent assistants, much the same way humans do. And it's a very difficult problem because it isn't always in a single repository, and sometimes agents are looking at multiple sources. And so I think some of those things, getting that foundational stuff in place so that agents can solve problems in a consistent way that are repeatable and in a structured format, and then taking those same learnings now and start to train your machines to do those same activities. So I think there's a whole layer we're just started getting at. Machine learning, I think, has been quite successful, if you've seen in speech recognition at the lower levels, just understanding what someone says. But now it's what do I do once I understand that is a more complex problem because it requires steps, it requires data sources, it requires multiple systems, and I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg of starting to even solve those issues.
Any more comments on, okay. Questions from our attendees?
How much have you guys seen the actual enterprise agents being used by the agents themselves versus actual people coming up and using them? Have you guys seen a lot of use in your technology for the agents themselves?
We have, certainly. Call center agents or live chat agents themselves?
Call center
Yeah,
agents in particular?
So we've seen several of our implementations from a virtual agent standpoint, they've turned internally to be able to make their agents more efficient. So, because we're accessing the same knowledge, right? As Phil said, one of the best virtual agents there is mimicking what an actual human agent can do. So if we can streamline ways to find information and navigate the enterprise, why not leverage that for internal purposes? So absolutely see that quite often.
And in that scenario, have you guys started on the agent side and worked your way out, or have you started on the other side or at the same time?
We started on the external side coming in, so consumer side coming in, and we just, organically within organizations, they see the value of that and how to leverage that more broadly across their enterprise.
We've seen virtual agents are really useful at codifying best practice and getting pockets of expertise out from the company, from silos within the enterprise. So, for example, in field service, we have fleets of trucks with engineers going out, fixing customer issues on site. And those guys really know the product inside and out, and they'll be able to fix a printer blindfolded. But what we were finding was that there was large volumes of those call-outs where they actually didn't need any parts to fix the problem, which indicated that we could have fixed the problem further upstream. So we've actually, putting agents in, nothing to do with customer interactions, but just internally within our own corporate communication, where what we can do is train the system using those engineers, but then put that knowledge set into our dispatch center or even further upstream into our welcome centers, so that we're actually stopping these problems getting through as far as a truck roll, which is obviously an expensive operation. So we've seen that idea of codifying that expertise from wherever the source of knowledge is, and then delivering that more widely within the enterprise.
I think in our case too, I'd say 20% to 25% of all our implementations, so pick 100 of them, are now agent as well as consumer. But we typically start on the consumer side. I can only think of about 3 or 4 clients across maybe banking and insurance that actually only exist in the agent environment, which is quite interesting. But it's very powerful, as already noted, and Tony talked about it as well. We have one client where if they pick up the phone, because of the nature of their business, they'll actually lose money in that transaction. So if they can help fend that off at the consumer level, that's great. Or if they can help that agent answer that question in a very short period of time, measured in 20, 30 seconds, and get off the phone from an AHT point of view, they still win. So the agent implementations are quite interesting that way. The one thing we do see is that our agent conversations and answers that are delivered to the agent augment what the consumer might receive as well, because the agent typically has more flexibility than we might want to offer a consumer. So the audience can be different. The question can be the same, but the conversation might be subtly different because I want to cancel an account, and the agent has more capabilities or power to do things that they can be educated about than the consumer might be offered just on the consumer site.
And one of the things we've observed as a interested third party has been that chat transcripts are just incredibly rich and easy to mine and there to the same degree that some of the renderings of recorded agent to person calls are, but both sides are clearly delineated. There's just a lot of neat stuff, and so part of the original engagement is just to do that analytics, to even to define what the major problems are, what small list of problems represent some of the heavy hitters and that sort of
And we've
stuff.
actually seen, leveraging those chat logs, or if
Yeah.
you've implemented natural language in your voice channel, those caller intents, right? So how do we apply all of that knowledge regardless of the channel? Because it's all the same common back, which is natural language understanding, and how do we implement that in a virtual assistant environment? So how do we leverage all that rich data to really get other channels, if you will, up to speed very quickly?
Yeah. And there aren't other, so if you turn the telescope around, we got a very interesting question after we issued we being Opus, after we issued the landscape, where company was asking how much or how efficiently can an intelligent assistant or conversational interface be used internally, and how? And we knew of a couple, like scheduling meetings. There's XIA or AI that does that. But Nick, have you seen like recognition that these things that we've been pointing at customers work well internally, other than just having the answers show up on an agent screen?
Yeah, I think certainly that field service example is one of those where we're very much automating that what was a chain of command, as it were, in terms of activity that's going on. I think there are a number of use cases. Thinking about some healthcare and so some of the transaction processing we're doing, where we're doing large volumes of mortgage processing and so on, where you just want to get a very quick situational awareness of what do I need to do next as an administrator trying to process this. What's my next action, and just having next best action informed to me, I think, is an example where we can just create some efficiencies. We're not looking to guide or do the work for them, but we're just saying, this is the order of events that need to take place for this communication to be effective.
Well, you mentioned the SharePoint. I mean, you think of all these things out towards at a cubicle level where there's documents that are people's pet documents, and they don't even, couldn't you just use some natural language interface to say how many people have, an interest in this just based on what their opens are?
Well, we saw some recent implementation by our clients. Always interesting what they do with your solution once they have it out of the box.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we appeared in their HR group.
Right.
And they were using the VA to interact with the employees to deliver answers to questions and processes that were about the HR function.
Open
because,
enrollment
again,
period is like a perfect time for that.
yeah, for healthcare. And, so for us, we love seeing these different use cases emerge because it's really not about the specific knowledge is it for a consumer. It's about really unlocking the ability for an individual to really self-serve. That's the bottom line. Whether it's a sales or a services-based channel, that's really what you're enabling. And if HR can do it inside an organization, so I understand my benefits plan and can use it, and I don't have to think like a search robot to do it, I can just ask my question about what's left in my dental benefit, that's a heck of a lot easier than trying to optimize a bunch of search terms and trying to get at it that way. So I think it's just a natural offshoot of success that our organizations are having outside and maybe in the agent environment, and seeing how the organization pivots that internally.
Yeah, and I think what we're uncovering, and I like it, the way people use stuff once they've opened it up. When you are in the enterprise, it's to fulfill enterprise objectives, which get down, if it's a contact center, those are pretty well understood, but in other ones, it's a time to market sort of issue, it's the improving employee productivity, and there's a lot of potential to fulfilling that. And that's going to come up in our next session, which has to do with the Intelligent Assistant Awards. But let's thank our panel here. I think we've drawn this to a close.